Hi, I'm Chris Fitzgerald. Thanks as always for joining me for the Jazz Bass Technique series. I'm here today with Hamilton Pinheiro, who is a recent graduate of the U of L Jazz Studies program. Hamilton has been living in Brasilia, Brazil, and making music there for some time. He came here a few years ago to get a master's degree in jazz bass, and he has been one of the most amazing and prolific students I've ever had in my studio, and so I'm really happy to have him here with me. We'll also be making a few more videos for the series as sort of utilizing his knowledge and perspective. But today the subject is about Bossa Nova and Brazilian bass lines and feels. And so to kick off that subject, one of the things that I've noticed as a bass teacher over all these years is that American jazz bass players tend to think of bossa nova and samba and Brazilian feels as being something very different than what they actually are or what they actually were originally. And it just comes from probably our education system and what we're exposed to. It's kind of a funny story, but I've had quite a few Brazilian students, all of them very accomplished and wonderful, and they come to the States to study jazz and primarily, I guess, to work on the walking technique and the swing feel. And then when they hear American bassists play bossa nova for the first time, there's always this moment where they're kind of going, "Oh, I see." Oh, that's how it's done here. And so I thought it would be really great, since Hamilton has great knowledge of Brazilian styles and feels, to actually have him teach us, and specifically teach me, as he has done quite a bit over the last 2 years, about how Brazilians actually approach this music as compared to the way that American jazz musicians have typically approached this music. I think I got that the way that I want. So, welcome, Hamilton.
Thank you very much.
Let me just start by asking you a few questions.
Yes, and thank you for your kind words.
Well, they're all deserved. Very much.
I'm flattered.
I wish in the frame, Hamilton's recital program is up here, but it's out of the frame. But it was a wonderful recital. So, anyway, so the first question I have is that, and I want just for the viewers, if we had been playing that tune in the way that American jazz musicians would typically say, okay, we're going to play Gentle Rain as a bossa nova, most American bass players who come up through our education system would start from the point of playing it like, I feel like Horace Silver's Song for My Father. So it would have sounded... had that feel, and the actual traditional Brazilian bossa nova feel is very different from that. And so I guess my first question is, can you talk about some of the differences between authentic traditional Brazilian bossa nova feel and American jazz bossa nova feel?
Before answering this question, I would like to point out my point of view about that. Like, I do not consider the way that American jazz players play the bossa nova as wrong.
Right.
It's just different.
Right.
Like the tradition of jazz players playing Brazilian music come like from 60 years ago. Like there are 6 years of evolution over time, and it took to a different path than we took in Brazil. So I just consider it different. And now, answering your question, I can point some difference that we play in Brazil and that you guys play here in the United States. And I think the two main ones that came to my eyes, to my ears when I listen to jazz players, is about the way that jazz players think. They think in 4 and we think in 2. And more specific to our realm, is about the bass line itself. It's a little different.
Great. And this is a really important point because, and I shouldn't even say American jazz, but I should say jazz players in the US, because obviously North America and South America. But the difference between 4 and 2 is a pretty big part of the Brazilian music that I've been exposed to. And so maybe you can talk about those differences a little bit, assume that the audience may be anyone from very beginners to very advanced people, so just stay general. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That covers everything. If I can if I can summarize Brazilian music, like very summarized, I would use some terms that I coined here during my master in UofL when I had to run the Brazilian ensemble to teach some students. I would say that Brazilian music has two main aspects that are downbeat and forward motion, which means if you're playing samba, a bossa nova, a partido alto, a samba canção, a choro, like they are very similar genres. They have several similar patterns, but all of those genres, they have the same feeling. The first thing is the downbeat. So we think in two, 1, 2, 1, 2, and we have to feel this downbeat. 1 and 2 and 1.
And I noticed when you do that, the 2 is heavier than the 1.
Yes, exactly. We have an accent on beat 2, and that comes from the samba. When you are in the samba school, like the huge group of percussionists playing, we have 3 kinds of surdo. It's a huge drum in a low pitch drum. There is one who plays the beat 1 is in a higher pitch, and the second is on beat 2 is in a lower pitch. So there is a sense of accent on beat 2. And the third surdo will play some variations, but like the most important is this 1, 2, 1, 2. There is an accent on beat 2. And that will be different. For example, if you play Bossa Nova, it's a little flat, just a slight accent on beat 2. If you play a samba, it will be a more prominent accent on beat 2. So that's the main thing. You have to feel the downbeat. 1, 2, 1, 2.
And we'll come back, I guess, because he said something very interesting about the 2 types of drum, the high drum on 1 and the low drum on 2. I suspect that when you come to talk about the lines themselves, the difference between the high and low drum will be part of the line.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
You're totally right.
Okay.
And I forgot what I would say.
Well, just working on more concepts related to 2 as opposed to 4. And the
yes,
differences in the
good.
sound, yeah.
That's it. And what's the difference between 2 and 4? It's basically the same, just the way that we think. If we are playing Gentle Rain,
As opposed to
1, 2, 3, 4, exactly.
right. And it's one of the first things that I'm going to go ahead and say North American jazz player now, jazz player from the U.S. When we see Brazilian charts for the first time, they look very dense with notes because they're written in 2. There's lots of 16th notes. So yeah. we are used to looking at longer measures in 4 with 8th notes. And it's like the Brazilian notation system smashes it all into 2 beats and uses 16ths, but it's also that you can feel it in a bigger pulse, a more basic pulse. Yeah.
And the second thing is the forward motion, where the melodies and the accompanying instrument will be. The forward motion are the off beats. If we are here in 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, cha 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 cha. These are the off beats. And if you play the melody, if you improvise thinking on those off beats, and one thing that I call the sweet spot, the very last 16th note, we are thinking in 2 and thinking in.
So you're talking
note.
about E, 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 and yeah, okay.
And this very last 16th note as anticipation is like what I call the sweet spot.
Okay.
For example, you can end all the phrases if you want. You can end on that spot.
Right.
Like 1, 2, 1 and 2. These are the where brings the all the forward motion of the Brazilian music. And when you put everything together, you have, for example, this downbeat.
So that part would be played by traditionally who's playing that syncopated part in the ensemble?
Comping instruments, so harmony and melody will be on.
So a guitar or
the guitar, piano,
Yeah, okay.
will be on that stuff. Drummers will play actually both because like the drummers will have some piece that will be the offbeats and some piece the downbeat. And bass players, we are downbeat.
Right.
Even if we don't play the downbeat, that's a tricky thing. But even if we don't play the downbeat, we have to feel it.
Okay.
1 and 2 and 1.
Right. It's the same way as saying that we can't think of an anticipation on the end of 4 without understanding that it's pulling against the implied 1. Right.
Yes.
Yes. Exact same
That's it.
thing. Yeah. Okay. So those are the main differences between feeling in 2 and feeling in 4.
And feeling 4.
Okay. What are some of the differences of the bass lines themselves? I know this is a really huge topic, but let's start with maybe so we're feeling in 2, and let's start with the idea of those drums and the high and the low, and then go from there, because that's one of the things when I hear a Brazilian bass player play, it's one of the first things I notice is that we go up, and they tend to go down.
Exactly. You just answered everything.
I've been listening to everything you've been telling me all these
Exactly.
last
So
2 years.
as we got the bass line from the surdos, there's a high pitch and low pitch. We try to emulate the instruments. So thinking song for my father instead of. We would play. And there is another subtle detail is about the note choice. Instead of 1 5 5 1 1, we play 1 1 5 5 1.
Okay.
That's the way that we play in Brazil.
Right. Now, the importance obviously of beat 1 and beat 2 are way more important. And so one of the things that, in watching, our school has a Brazilian ensemble, so in watching, and the Brazilian students are always TAs for the Brazilian ensemble, which makes perfect sense if you think about it. And watching how they instruct the US jazz players about the importance of those syncopated notes and how high they are up in the hierarchy, because you just now, you notice he did not go. It was more like, and it was almost as though those second notes were coincidental and didn't really matter whether they were notes or rhythms, right?
Totally right.
So maybe talk about that idea of those notes, the rhythmic aspect of those notes, and just basically expand on that subject a little bit.
Yeah. So the most important thing are the downbeats. So I would say the bass is feeling the downbeat, and we can add. Most important to the second beat, just a subtle note. It can be a ghost note as
and that would be the third drum, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
The third drum plays more than this, but but that definitely that comes from the third drum. It can be ghost note. I can also add it to beat 1. Subtle, because the most important are the downbeats.
Right.
If I want some emphasis in one portion of the tune, I can add more energy.
Right. Okay, good. Maybe this would be a good time to play the beginning of Gentle Rain, a little excerpt from Gentle Rain, the sort of way that American jazz players normally play it, and then play it with the Brazilian feel, or attempting the Brazilian feel. So in order to make this actually authentic, I'll play the melody and you play the different feels.
Okay.
if I play the bass line, it probably won't be nearly as authentic. So I'll just come in right on the melody.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll play the first 8 bars or so,
Okay.
right? Of just with the sort of Song for My Father feel. And yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, keep going. Right. And now let's do it with the more traditional Bossa Nova feel. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. So one of the first things I notice when playing over that is that the bass is eating so much less space and it's leaving more room for everyone else. And it's one of the lessons that I talk about with every bass student so much in studio, is that sometimes we get so focused on what we're doing and coming up with this great groove and this great line that we can easily fail to see how it fits in the global situation with all the other players playing. So for instance, when he plays this, he's taking up a part of the rhythmic spectrum that the drums will already be taking up, the melody will partially be taking up, and the comping instruments will be taking up, which means, I would think, now I haven't played that much of, I usually try to avoid that when I'm playing with more authentic Brazilian groups, but my experience with playing with, even just with drummers and Brazilian pianists, is that when they're comping that way, unless I'm completely in tune with their 8th note, and in this case 16th note feel, there are these little clashes where we're feeling that syncopation at a slightly different time, and it makes the groove muddy, especially with drummers. And the faster it gets, the faster a tune gets, the less I play those little anticipations, because there's these little clashes. I don't know if that's something that you've noticed as well, about why it might be better to play the simpler feel.
Yeah, that's one concern that I have for example, when I play fast. I try to play more simple, just to avoid clashing with the drummer. I must be really confident on that specific tempo to play the entire bass line, and really locked in with the drummer. That's a huge concern.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the other thing, playing on top of that, which feels so great, is that when he stops playing all of those syncopations, for me, all of a sudden my imagination leaps into filling that space, how I might do it while I'm playing, but also just imagining what the drummer might do. So it really, to me, if he plays that simple, and when the bass player plays that simple, then the drummer is automatically more interactive in the texture, because the focus of attention is shifting all the time, rather than this person's playing a groove and this person's playing a groove and this person's playing a melody and this person's comping. It's like it all becomes this three-dimensional sound stage, which is just wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's the basic feel. So the fifth, when you go to it, tends to go down rather than up.
Yes.
The eighth notes or the 16th notes, depending on whether you're thinking it 2 or 4, the syncopated notes in traditional Brazilian, in that tradition, tend to be root 5, root,
Yes.
root 5. Once you get beyond that basic pattern, and then they can become ghost notes, as we said,
Yes.
rather than actual notes.
Yeah.
Right. Once you get beyond that, go
Just
ahead.
one thing.
Go ahead.
I will use your example as another
Pardon my
thing.
wedding ring sound. Sorry.
That is actually I use it as an example. That's one thing that also have notes here in the United States. Cutting the note.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes with actual sound, as you did with your wedding ring.
Not on purpose.
Not on purpose. But sometimes with sound, or sometimes just dumping the note. And we, in Brazil, we would tend to leave the note ringing.
Okay.
Like a little more. There's a trend, I've seen several students here, several basic students. I know that's easier, having this rhythm support is really easier to play, but it breaks a little of the swing, it breaks all the feel that the bass note can bring to the song when
Right.
you're playing.
So by way of comparison, one of the things that the students often do as when they're playing walking lines is put space between the notes as well. So you hear this. As opposed to connecting the line, which is something that I'm always talking about. It's a different feel, so I believe that's kind of what you're getting at there.
Exactly, and I'm not saying that this is wrong. It brings a different flavor. We tend to play longer notes, but sometimes I will play and shorten the note. I can shorten the notes.
Easy for you to say. Okay. So when you get beyond this basic pattern and there are places in the music where you feel it might be appropriate for the bass player to play a fill, what are some of the ways that you might approach that in a traditional sense?
Two possibilities that we use a lot. We can play variations in the bass pattern, and we can play phrases. First one, variations in the bass pattern. If I'm playing here, let's think C minor chord.
Okay.
I'm playing here. I can play chromatic notes. I can play, if I'm in C minor, I can play the 7. I can play the 3rd. I can go up. Always about variation. I would not play like 3 times in a row the same.
Right. But just something that makes it more of an individual voice.
Yes.
When might you do that over the course of a song? Right at the beginning, or once it's established, or
more than established. After
Yeah.
establishing, after setting the pace, I always want the first thing when I play is make sure that the groove, all the feeling is running well. okay, I'm feeling everything, it's comfortable, now I have some fun.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And the second thing is about like playing some phrase.
Right.
And to play phrase, you can play whatever we want, but the trick will be that playing what I call Brazilian syncopations. Off beats, pam 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 pam, reaching the end of 4, and one that's very common in Brazil,
so a question I have about that, and this is something that, so in the bass studio we talk a lot about being aware of where the space is of the other instruments, especially the phrases of the melody, and that I always tell a story about learning to play fills on a gig with a singer who gave me really dirty looks if I stepped on her space. If she wasn't finished with her phrase and I played a fill, I would hear about it or get a really nasty look. And that's really the best way to learn for that. Is it much the same in what you're describing, where those things go?
Yes, absolutely.
You don't just indiscriminately start getting busy.
No. And especially depending on the setting. For example, in Brazil, if I'm playing in a samba group with a 7-string guitar player, I barely play phrase because the 7-string guitar player, he plays the phrase all the time. The 7-string guitar player is the counterpoint line of the melody, so
right.
they always playing phrase. And I go more rhythm, more towards rhythm variation than to phrase.
Right.
So let's play the melody. Could you play the melody?
Yep.
And I play some variations in the line and some phrase.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sense, and that just seems to be a common sense musical tenet to live by, that share the space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as a bass player, also I have some freedom to play more rhythmically. There's one spot that we played exactly the same rhythm.
Yeah,
that's very common.
It's very funny because when you're doing that. I'm playing the melody, but I start to think like a bass player, like I should not embellish too much because I know that you're going to be playing fills, and if I embellish too much, you're kind of waiting to play a fill. So yeah. So maybe the last topic I wanted to cover is about the difference between the instruments. So to the audience, I would make the point that a lot of the Brazilian students who come here to study are trying to learn more about the U.S., American tradition of jazz swing feel, which is traditionally played on a double bass. And up till now, most all of those students have been double bass players. Some who double on electric and some who don't. And so what's funny in Hamilton's case is that he was the first student to come and only play electric bass through his degree program. And so we are dealing with this translation of instruments whenever we are dealing with a subject, because the two instruments have a different sustain envelope, a different attack envelope, but we're trying to basically get the same sort of feel as much as is possible on each instrument. So when he's playing swing, he's trying a little bit to make it sound like it feels when it's played on a double bass. And it helps that he's playing a fretless bass guitar most of the time, but still, very different instrument. And so when U.S. jazz players are trying to learn the Brazilian feel, they're often doing it on a double bass when the traditional, original application was on an electric bass. So what advice would you have for someone playing this instrument to try to occupy the same space as that instrument does? There's obviously, we can't play as fluidly or as nimbly as you can on a bass guitar, and the sound is different. So I'll just let you take that one for now.
Well, actually, I would split the Brazilian tradition in two parts.
Okay.
With the double bass and with the electric bass.
Okay.
Because during the 50s and the 60s, mostly the samba in Brazil, well, the samba jazz, we coined the term in Brazil. It's basically a jazz trio playing Brazilian music. All the Brazilian music at that time, Zimbo trio is one of the most famous, the piano, bass, and drum, and it's a double bass.
Right.
So we have a huge tradition in double bass in the playing the samba and bossa nova, but on the other hand, we also have a huge tradition on electric bass. So we have like two ways.
Right.
For a double bass player, would be better, will be easier, not better, easier playing bossa nova and slow to medium tempo tunes, and concentrate more on the downbeats than the rhythm variations.
Right.
Because here on the electric bass, it's really easy to play those notes, and I can add like a lot of stuff. I know that's really hard to play in a double bass.
Yes.
But when a double bass players concentrate more on the downbeats, more in the feeling, and for example, if I play a fast Só Danço Samba, I'm more thinking on the downbeats and driving the rhythm toward that. But it would be wise listening what double bass players have been doing all this time. Since the 60s, and even nowadays, we have very good double bass players playing Brazilian music.
Right, and I'm going to ask you for a short list of things that people can listen to that I will attach to the video in one way, maybe just in the YouTube comments or something, so some links maybe to something that would be good examples of things.
The samba jazz trios would be awesome. Zimbo trio, tamba trio, CDs, albums with Antônio Carlos Jobim. Antônio Carlos Jobim's with Elis Regina. She was an excellent, awesome singer, like probably the best, the top singer that we ever had. Elisa Regina with her group during the 70s, they're excellent. There's a very famous album, César Camargo Mariano and Hélio Delmiro. It's piano and guitar, there's no bass. But you can get a lot of the feeling of Brazilian music from that group. The modern guys, you can... Rosa Passos, she's another excellent singer. She's from Brasilia. Her rhythm approach is unbelievable, and she always has a very good group playing with her, and mostly playing double bass. Sometimes, like in general, half of the album is double bass, half the album electric bass. Trio Corrente is a very modern instrumental Brazilian music. They have been active for the last 10 years, 15 years. The bassist, Paulo Paulelli, he plays both double bass and electric bass those are very good reference. And I can think more.
That's
more.
okay. I will actually ask Hamilton to put together a PDF document, which we can just link on my website.
Yes.
With maybe some links to online versions of some of this stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it goes by pretty quick when you're talking about it. So I want to thank you for taking the time to teach us a few things and give us some things to think about. Do you have any last thoughts before we play Gentle Rain on the Way Out?
Yes, listen to Brazilian music, like original Brazilian music. Get those records that you will put on that PDF file and listen to get the feeling. Like here in the United States, we have like tons of recordings of we call Latin tunes and Bossa Nova, samba. It's a reference of the way that American musicians play. If you want to listen the way that we play, listen to our recordings. That will be a huge...
And that is the most common sense thing in the world, since when students come from other countries, the first thing we do is say, listen to the history of the music, because that's where the truth is.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
And we're going to play some music on the way out. Okay.
Thank you.